Ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
CTech Club is a global community of founders and CEOs of construction technology startups. Founded in 2019, it has grown to cover 425 founders in 31 countries, creating a safe space for them to collaborate and learn from each other. Now, the CTech Club is getting involved with the space sector, with a space chapter specifically supporting founders focused on design and construction in space. The space chapter's mission is to support independent innovators whose technology is suitable for in-orbit or lunar development or extreme environments or space facilities here on Earth. Joining me on this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast is John Priestland, founder of CTech Club. John, welcome to the program.
Hello, Tom. Great to be with you.
It's great to have you with me today. I really appreciate your time. Let's start off talking about the space chapter of the CTech Club and its mission.
Yes, indeed. Well, we've worked with founders and CEOs of construction tech startups for quite a number of years. And one of the things you find is that it's a pretty lonely place to be. You've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. You've got to worry about clients. You've got to worry about fundraising. You've got to worry about staff. And you know what they say, a problem shared and all of that. So in 2019, we brought 12 founders together for a drink after work, and they got on brilliantly, sharing all sorts of problems and frustrations. And now we think it's the time to take that trusted environment, that safe space where founders can share and work together into the space sector, because there are some really exciting developments in orbit, on the moon, and further afield. And we think it's time to help founders play their part in the space mission.
So how did you get started with the actual space chapter? What inspired its creation?
Well, there are clearly a number of really exciting developments going on. One sees SpaceX missions being launched. One sees plans for moon bases, and one sees the opportunities for further afield exploration and discovery. One of the things we realized that there were quite a lot of technologies in, if you like, conventional construction that were increasingly relevant for design and construction in space. Technologies like 3D printing, technologies like robotic construction. And there are new and different challenges about how you go about master planning and designing structures and encampments in a space environment, which we think founders have a role to play. So it's interesting to look at that crossover between the technologies that are already in play for construction on the Earth and those that are relevant for a space environment.
Then who's your primary target audience for the space chapter?
The primary focus is supporting founders and CEOs, those independent innovators who often find themselves somewhat alone. But I think the interest of the space chapter will be right across the hierarchy of organizations in space. We're already getting a lot of interest from agencies who see the opportunity to support innovation within the supply chain, to promote acceleration of the efforts and to bring new technologies into the space environment. Part of what they may do is encourage more of that independent innovation and that, if you like, sharing of social value with smaller companies into the primes and the tier ones. So we're also getting interest from tier ones and consultants who see the advantages of bringing this sort of innovation into the space world.
So I imagine that at this point, with the number of members that you have, you've gone beyond shooting through for a pint at the pub to talk about things. So how do you engage with your founders and talk about these issues?
Well, I mentioned that the CTech Club, the main one, started in late 2019. What we rapidly hit was COVID and lockdown. And so what became a drink down the pub became an online Zoom call. And out of every adversity comes opportunity. And we grew very rapidly at that point from a London-based network into a global group. And by mid 2020, we had more than 120 members. And we had moved to a Zoom-based model. We have a very vibrant social media channel. We have face-to-face dinners that we organize, particularly in the margins of conferences and exhibitions, where we can be an advocate for greater prominence and a role at those conferences for founders. But I think at its heart, it's about creating that environment where founders are comfortable talking to each other. And some of the most touching comments I've got, this is the feedback that makes it all worthwhile, is founders who say that relationships that started as professional encounters have become firm friendships. And I think that is a very heartwarming thing to hear. And we're doing the same for the space chapter. We've already got nearly 50 members, founders and CEOs and other independent innovators. And we can start to see those connections forming, the sharing of opportunities and the opportunities for collaboration between founders and indeed between agencies and primes as well.
I can't imagine that there are that many companies that are focused specifically on construction in space. So when you talk about the number of founders that you have, what's kind of the range of technologies that you're seeing from, you mentioned 3D printing, but what are some of those other things that are part of what it is that you need to get to build something in orbit or on the moon?
I can certainly list a few for you now, Tom. One key one is structures. So new ways of creating structures either in orbit or on the moon. For example, an American company called Automatic Construction is using a polyurethane membrane. We think of it here as a fancy castle where it would be pumped with air for children to bounce on. They're using that sort of structure reinforced with threads or metal rods effectively acting like rebar, and you can fill it with concrete. Maybe you can fill it with substances on the moon to provide that structural integrity. Very interesting. There's a company called Interstellar Space that's creating very small manufacturing pods that will be able to create very pure elements or materials, or carry out bio research and manufacturing in space using the near zero gravity. Similarly, a company called Space Solar is putting together a network of energy generation modules, solar farms, if you like, in space. And then you've got the 3D printing companies like Icon, who are working with NASA, and Mighty Buildings, who are also based in the States, and a range of architects who are coming up with new designs for the way in which buildings and other structures can be created. And that's even before you start thinking about replacements for the International Space Station. And it just goes on and on. And it's wonderful to see that crossover between innovation and technology we've seen already on the Earth and how it can be repurposed for the challenges of the space environment.
So then, John, how do you see the ideas and technologies from the space chapter impacting the space industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
I like to think that the startups will be a source of innovation and ideas, but that it will require collaboration between agencies and the primes and the startups to make them really come together and work. It's perhaps a little bit like the changes that there have been in the last 20 years in the pharmaceutical sector. 20 years ago, it would be large primes that would carry out all the research in-house. Now there are startups which create new drugs and take them through phase 1A, phase 1B, phase 2 testing, so that they're then picked up by the large drug companies. And similarly, startups can be that source of innovation, but probably always expecting to work with the large primes and as part of the main programs. But it's the speed of execution, the speed of thought, the opportunity to challenge the conventional ideas, and to be able to move forward without perhaps some of the constraints there are in large companies. Oh, I have to run that by my risk committee in Los Angeles, or I'm too busy with budget reviews and quarterly business reviews. These are not things that you hear startups saying. They just get on with executing and delivering the next version, the next phase, the next adaptation of their technology at speed and with skill. And that's very exciting and very positive.
It sounds to me like one of the things that's really driving this is the fact that it's not government agencies that are doing all of these things now. That the private sector is taking over a lot of these really innovative ideas, and that's going to help drive what it is that we all want to do in space.
I think that's right, but I think we're at a crossover moment with when it comes to startups in the space sector. Many of them are relying on calls and competitions from the agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And what we want to see is more genuine market opportunities being picked up, which will then attract venture capital firms into the space technology startup world. We saw that in the late part, around about 2018, 2019, with
mm-hmm.
conventional construction technology, where VCs were coming in going, this is quite interesting. And there were some very attractive valuations which encouraged them to come in. But at the moment, there are few, not none, but there are a few venture capital firms that are really actively looking at investment in space-related startups, certainly construction space. And one of the things we want to do on behalf of the CTEC Club Space Chapter is have those conversations on behalf of startups with funders, with agencies who might want to put money in, but certainly with the private sector funders, particularly venture capital, and show that this is an attractive environment, as well as engage with the agencies on what they need to do to encourage that investment, and then everybody wins.
Along those lines, then, John, what are some of the key things that the Space Chapter is doing to support the founders and innovators?
Well, what we're trying to do is to give them more airtime at conferences so they get greater coverage, particularly for some of the smaller startups. It's expensive to exhibit, so trying to create environments where they can come and exhibit as a group. We ran something called the CTEC Club Startup Village at Digital Construction Week recently. We're exploring the opportunities to run a CTEC Space Chapter Startup Village or Startup City. We'll see how ambitious we can get. We're building relationships with agencies. We've had David Radonovsky, who was the former Chief Financial Officer at NASA, as our speaker at our July meeting. We've got Advanit Makaya, who's in the advanced manufacturing team at European Space Agency, speaking in September. And we've got Curtis Rogers from Brick and Mortar Ventures speaking in October. Curtis heads up one of the VCs that's really interested in space, so that would be very good. But at its heart, it's about creating the peer-to-peer relationships between founders. That takes time, and it takes building trust. And that's one of the things the CTEC Club has done, if I may say, really well since 2019. We've created that trusted environment where founders believe in what we're doing, and they believe they can share their ideas with others, and you put into the pot and you take out of the pot. And if you can do that effectively, then everybody across the piece is a winner.
How would you describe some of the technologies that these companies are developing?
Well, I think some of them are really, really novel, and it's fascinating to see some of the brainstorming that goes on. I mean, I was in a brainstorming event with some startups and founders around space a few weeks ago, and they were talking about all sorts of very novel ways of transporting people and materials across the lunar surface. Doesn't necessarily follow that you go across the surface. You could go underground. And indeed, one of the ideas that really convinced me that this was worth doing was a website, a news article I saw from February, which was around Northrop Grumman being appointed to develop a railroad on the moon, a pilot study. And we work on a fairly advanced, exciting railroad project here in the UK, HS2, which goes from London to Birmingham. But you look at that railroad on the moon and you kind of think, wouldn't that be an amazing opportunity to work on? And I'm sure that there are founders and startups that have technologies that either now or with lots of adaptation could be very relevant to a project like that. And wouldn't that be a thing to work on?
It'd be a lot of fun to hop the train on the moon, I guess.
Exactly.
My guest is John Priestland, founder of CTEC Club on the Ex Terra Podcast. Take a moment right now and click subscribe to be sure you don't miss any of our podcasts, or if you're watching on YouTube, any of the videos from Ex Terra, the Journal of Space Commerce. John, how do you collaborate with other organizations and companies in the space and construction industries?
We are building relationships at all levels with agencies, with tier ones and primes, and with consultants. So there are other groups that focus on different parts of the piece. For example, groups that focus on extreme environments. And that's a really nice proxy for design and construction in space. Groups that are focusing on how you build in Antarctica, or how you build deep down in the oceans. And so the same sorts of challenges of thinking outside the box, going back to some of the engineering first principles, and fast prototyping and learning, recognizing we've got very high safety critical environments and very complex systems and system of systems environments. So we're working with a number of organizations that are doing those sorts of activities, as well as looking at organizations that are looking to create launch facilities and space facilities here on the Earth. Might be different sort of technology, but would love to see relevant innovation brought into spaceports and other facilities as a way of supporting and encouraging the use of technology, and particularly where it can be appropriate for missions further afield.
You've almost answered this question already, but I kind of want you to dig down a little bit deeper and talk about some of those challenges that startups face in advancing their space construction technology.
So I think one of the challenges at Founder Space, which I haven't touched on before, is the cost of sales. So if you're a large organization where you already have lots of clients, you're selling the new service or the new product to an existing client. You don't have to create that new sense of trust and that new route to market. Whereas founders have to do both. They have to create the new trusted relationship and the product at the same time, along with doing everything else all the time, raising and securing the funding, making sure that everybody gets their payroll, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole load of very important challenges that founders in space startup space, which are entirely common to the challenges that founders of startups across the globe face. The specifics of the space sector are the hierarchical nature in terms of the agencies and the primes, the relatively small number ultimately of those agencies and programs. So if you're not on Artemis, then how do you get involved in something on the moon? All roads lead to Artemis. The challenges of interacting with quasi or actual government organizations, where there's perhaps a certain amount of risk aversion, which you wouldn't find necessarily if you were dealing in the private sector, and both the innovative nature and in some cases the security related nature of some of the technologies that one is working with. So there's lots of things that are the same in common with other sectors and other challenges that founders face, and there are clearly some specific things of the space sector. And by getting founders together, they can share those challenges and learn from each other, and that's what we're here to do.
So then what are some of the crossovers between terrestrial and space construction companies, and what are some of the major differences?
Yeah. So there's a wonderful Israeli company who are developing a solution to a big challenge on Earth, which is, we call them utility strikes. That's where somebody has a large yellow excavator, they're digging up the Earth, and there's something in there. There's an existing cable or an existing pipe, and oh dear, that can be extremely hazardous for the driver and the operator and cause very major delays on site.
I think they call that backhoe. They call that backhoe attenuation, don't they?
That's right. That's a good phrase. So the company, which is called Rod Radar, is putting sensors in the excavator basket. So instead of it being a dumb tape that you use to simply lift the Earth out of the ground, you turn it into a dynamic sensor, sensors plus AI, and so you can scan the surface of the ground. Very interesting. Take that into the lunar environment, and you've got something which is much more able to know what it is what it is digging. So the idea of taking conventional semi-autonomous or autonomous plant from the Earth and thinking about how that might be adapted to the moon is a really interesting area. And to take that one stage further, there are key sectors on the Earth, particularly, for example, the mining sector. Mm-hmm. So startups and technologies driving very efficient, very autonomous production of minerals and coal and other things that are being extracted in the likes of Western Australia, being able to take some of that technology through the necessary adaptation process into space-type environments, shows some of the crossovers that we can bring. Also some of the similarities, but also the differences, because clearly an excavator on the moon is going to be awfully different than an excavator in a distant mine in Western Australia.
Well, maybe not too terribly different, but I've watched some of those shows. It's pretty remote out there, but be that as it may, I want to just get a little bit more insight into you, John. How did you get involved in space? What called you to do something in the space industry?
So it's a privilege to run my own consultancy. I've been in large engineering consultancies for much of my career, but the last 6 years, I've run my own consultancy specializing in construction technology and digital transformation for the built environment. And that's allowed us to build the relationships with the wonderful founders that we have. So I don't need to go and seek permission from my boss to go into a new area. And we get the sense that things are really happening in space, that the trends are very positive and away from everything being done centrally by large agencies into a freeing up and a freeing of the spirit, and that there are particular drivers and challenges in Europe and maybe even more so in North America to have some of that spirit that there was there in the 60s towards this needs to be done and this needs to be done soon, this needs to be done well. And that for me has a lot of the characteristics that founders can get involved with. Plus going back to the Northrop Grumman railway on the moon, I looked at that and thought, yeah, that's the sort of thing that's worth getting out of bed in the morning for. So if anybody from the Northrop Grumman Railroad on the Moon team is watching this podcast, Tom, tell them to give us a call because we'd love to get involved in that project and many other very exciting ones as well.
We'll make sure your contact information is included in the write-up so that folks can find you. Just a couple of things more, John. What are some of the future plans and goals you have for the space chapter?
Well, at the moment, what we're doing is we're spanning the connection between conventional construction and space construction. But if there is an appetite for this from founders and from agencies, then going a step further, we've got the C-Tech Club, C for construction, morphing into an S-Tech Club, a space technology club, could be a really interesting thing to do. And that would open up a much wider market for technologies and for founders to get involved, to do with satellites, to do with all sorts of scanning and launch capabilities that wouldn't fall within our construction definition. I hope we're going to be able to build particular bridgeheads in North America, but also in Australia and potentially in other parts of the world as well. The 31 countries in the Earth-based C-Tech Club, I don't think we'll get as far as 31, but I think it is a global opportunity, and we've got founders involved in North America, in Europe, in Africa, and in Australia at the moment, and I'm sure more to come. And I think we would like to be advocates for startups so that they're seen as a much more natural place in space construction, and that the funding does come through to support them all the way through pre-seed, seed, Series A and Series B, and that there should be some very large startups in due course. Many founders go into creating their startup with the hope that they're going to create a unicorn, a privately held company valued at more than $1 billion. Let's hope that in the next 5 to 10 years, there are unicorns coming out of those founders and startups that are in the C-Tech Club. That will be great for space, be great for investors, be quite good for the founders themselves.
So if there are founders out there who are listening or watching this podcast, how can they find you?
So our website is c-techclub.org. They can contact us by emailing info@c-techclub.org, or go to the Space Chapter tab at the top of the website, click on that and press Find Out More. And we'll be delighted to hear from founders or even potential founders. If somebody's thinking, oh, I might want to go and set up a startup, I'm interested in space, I've got some very relevant and interesting technology, get in touch as well. We might be able to put them in contact with an existing founder to hear A, how exciting it is, but B, how difficult it is. And one of the recurring themes is the need for perseverance and resilience. Try again as a founder. So it's not for everybody.
It has become a cliche that space is hard.
Being a founder is hard, space is hard, so that's 2 out of 2.
Just one thing more, John, and we ask this question of all of our guests, and that is to look out, if you would, over the next about 10 to 15 years in space commerce and your role in that, and tell me what you see.
So I hope we'll be able to look back on some really exciting projects, but I also hope that we'll be able to look back on very appropriate ways of solving some of the problems. One of the things that we have as an opportunity in space is, if you like, to be born digital. Construction on the Earth is challenging because we've been constructing on the Earth since people were coming out of caves.
Sure.
But the way in which we construct on the Earth is pretty similar to the way we did 50, 80, even 150 years ago. But when we look at constructing in space and the way we design, we can go born digital. We can do things right from the beginning. We can understand the complexity of systems that we need to get right. We can build in safety thinking digitally from the get-go. So I hope, in addition to working on some of the great projects that are out there and supporting founders, we can also bring some of that problem-solving mindset so we do it right, and we do it right first time.
John, thanks so much for your time. It's been an interesting conversation, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you, Tom. Been great to talk to you.
John Priestland is the founder of C-Tech Club, which has recently launched a space chapter. And that's going to do it for this edition of the Ex Terra Podcast. You can subscribe to the audio version of the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Audible, and many other popular podcasting platforms. Be sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any of our podcasts or any of our other videos. You can get daily updates on space commerce by subscribing to the Journal of Space Commerce on Substack at www.xterrajsc.com. And one thing more, be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn and follow us on X at xterrajsc. Until next time, I'm Tom Patton. Thanks for joining us.
I wanna go faster, faster. Hands in the air, we're gonna crash. Searching for the answers like Galileo through his looking glass. Thirst for reason. Our dreamer's eyes we gaze into a sense of purpose known by view. Like finding water on the moon.